Hey, what's up, guys? JB here. And this is another one for sort of my foundational topics here for War of the Visions. We're going to be talking all things Espers today. This will definitely be a review topic for many of you out there, but even for my longtime players out there, I know that you see those questions in Discord all the time. Hey, I just pulled Alaya, what is going to be the best Esper for her? Or, hey, I just pulled Halloween Lucia, what is going to be the best Esper I should raise on her first? I know that these are questions that I see on my guild's Discord. I'm sure, many of you out there see something similar. But, maybe you're actually one of those players that ask those questions, from time to time. Or maybe you're just a newer player to the game in general. So the goal of my video today is to actually empower you so that you don't really have to ask that question ever again. So today we're going to be talking Espers, and, Espers really are an essential part of team building in War of the Visions. And that is precisely why this topic is so foundational for a high-level understanding and high-level play, within this game. So let's actually just start with that thought. And that thought really goes hand in hand, with my team building approach. And the first thing that I would say on that is that Espers really are just another piece of equipment for you in this game. And arguably they're going to be your most important piece of equipment that you can actually have on your character sheet. They contribute a large portion of the stats to your final team builds. And those stats are increased based on your resonance level with that Esper, whether it's 1 or all the way up to 10. And that is why getting that resonance up to level 10, is so very important for setting your team up for success, especially when it comes to the agility value that the Esper actually bestows. Now, a lot of people will throw around the term BIS or BIS. It means best in slot, and that is from their experience in other games, where there may be a de facto choice, in terms of the best items or equipment that you can have, on a given character or, within a certain situation in the game. And that's going to lead me to my next point here. And I'm going to assert that, best in slot actually doesn't really exist in this game, War of the Visions. And instead, what I say is that BIS or BIS means best in situation. So, the definition of what's going to be best, really starts with the units that you're using and, understanding, what you're actually trying to accomplish with that unit and who you're actually going to be going up against, on the battlefield. So, for example, maybe you're trying to set up a team that can contend with the current missile meta in the game, whether that is an ice or a lightning missile team. Or, maybe you yourself are trying to take advantage of those missile units, on the other side. And depending on which side of the coin that you're on there, that is going to completely shift the priorities for you, up to and including the Espers that you're using in that battle. So, so similarly, that, if you were using a slash-based team, you may have certain equipment that you use to defend against that, or maybe even to do that type of damage. The same goes for any other type of damage, that you're trying to maybe leverage or actually defend against in this game. So, that is my general approach, when it comes to Espers and team building, but, how do we actually go ahead and actually apply that? Well, just like any other piece of equipment in this game, each Esper is going to have their own unique traits, stats, and attributes that can help you accomplish your team building goal. So to effectively use them, you're going to want to build up some general awareness of what those are so that you can make the most informed choice for the particular situation that you may have at hand. And that's really where my video today comes in. And to help you guys out with that, I have put together some infographics that we can walk through and talk about to sort of help better visualize, some of those things. And what I've done is I've actually organized some different categories of interest and areas that I think tend to come up most often within the game. And starting it off, I'm going to be talking about agility. Now, agility is arguably one of the most important factors, when it comes to Espers. When you think about using something like a 15% agility card in a party, which is a very meta thing to do, that's really only netting, most units in the game, somewhere in between 8 to 10 agility. Well, we have Espers in the game that are actually going to get you up to 20 agility on your character. So they are just very crucial, to your final agility number. And outside of your innate total that you begin with, they really are representing the biggest singular bump that you can give yourself, when it comes to that particular category. So, here in the graphic, I've put together all of the fastest Espers in the game. And you can see there at the top, I have a speed index. And the slowest Espers in the game are going to be starting out at that 11 agility value. 15 is going to be sort of your median or average agility agility level. And then we have a small handful that are going to be topping out at that 20 agility value that I've shown here. And I am actually including Dark Ramu, in the discussion today. We actually should be getting him here in global very, very soon. Now, agility is just universally valuable in War of the Visions. It has a direct impact on your CT gain and thus how quickly and how often that your turns are coming up in battle. And that is why there is just so much focus, put on this stat in general. As it turns out, a turn-based strategy game, the most powerful thing in the game is actually getting more turns, and agility is actually what helps you do that. So does that make this handful of Espers that I show here on the screen, the best in the game, simply because they're the fastest ones? No, not really. Espers, they do actually bring a lot more than just their base agility value. So, you really need to consider the totality of what the Esper is going to give you to sort of make the best choice, for your given situation. But, as we discussed, agility, it is a very important factor, and it certainly may shoot some of these Espers up your priority list, if they actually have other attributes that you may be interested in for your team. And that's going to lead me into my next section here, and this one is going to be all about accuracy. Now, accuracy, it's not nearly as vital right now, as it has been in months past, when literally light evade was everywhere in the game, everywhere you looked. It didn't matter which mode, you'd see Elena, Locke, even Violet in there sometimes. Now, thankfully, we're not seeing it as much these days, but evade units, they're still kicking around out there, and, especially in limited cost content, evade is still a major threat, if your team isn't prepared to deal with it. And accuracy Espers are an integral piece of that preparation. Now, currently, the highest accuracy that we can get on any Esper is 22, and there are actually a handful of them that I have here on the graphic that can reach that value. And that actually does include a couple of the MR variety with Merilith and Bloody Moon. Now, personally, I do actually make it a habit, whenever I'm building up a new unit, to farm up resonance with at least one of these 22 accuracy Espers. Generally, that's going to start with Odin. He's definitely one of the better ones for that. But, depending on the unit and sort of what their damage type is, you can definitely lean towards other ones. For magic damage dealers, Ramu and Typhon are actually very good choices for that. And then the cost limited, modes, certainly Bloody Moon and Merilith can shave off some of the cost and actually be pretty good choices there. So there on the left, that is the top end, but there are actually a number of Espers that would be sort of in a mid-range accuracy level, and that would be somewhere between 12 to 18 accuracy that I have here on the right side. And I do actually have a special note here for Glacial. If you were actually to pull up his Esper board, you would actually only see 7 for accuracy nodes available, but he does actually have 15% in luck that he can add onto it in that same node tree. So I do tend to combo those nodes together, and the rough math on that 15% luck, for most units, it's going to be somewhere between 7 to 11 additional accuracy. And of course, that all depends on the base luck value of the unit that you're equipping it on. So, considering all that, it actually would put Glacial on similar footing as these other Espers here. Now, I did actually include a couple of SR choices here as well in Zoo and Floatai. These are actually often overlooked by a lot of players out there, but, when it comes to accuracy, these are actually the best low-cost options for that. And, for cost-restricted play, especially if you're looking at something with a team cost, these actually can be very nice Espers to look at. If you can shave off maybe 10 to 20 cost, compared to an MR or a UR Esper, especially when we've had, team restriction costs of, as low as 500, that can sometimes allow you to fit in a higher cost unit, which can make a pretty big difference. All right, guys, so that was accuracy, and kind of going hand in hand with that is going to be evade. So these are actually the evade Espers. And I'd say currently, we have about 3 Espers that are, within the same general ballpark for raw evade that they provide, with Glacial in there, just coming in a rung below. Again, he has that 7 raw evade that he can provide, and then he has that 15% luck, on top of it. So we do have both Tetrasylphid and Chimera here tied at 25 evade, and then we have Dark Odin, coming in close behind that at 22. Now, if you have all of these choices available to you, which is going to be the best one to use, well, at that point, I'd say it kind of comes down to the unit that you're looking at and sort of the damage type that they're working with, or maybe even the element that they are. But in almost all cases, I would go with Dark Odin as my first pick, mainly since his human killer nodes, they are going to apply to really any damage dealer that you're working with. And that just gives you a lot of flexibility, especially if that damage dealer maybe has 2 different damage types that they work with. Now, if you had a wind or a dark evade unit that you were using, I can definitely see arguments being made for either Tetra or Chimera respectively. Personally, I always end up building my evade units with all of these, just to kind of give myself that flexibility. And, especially if I'm putting multiple evade units together, sometimes you might want to swap around, which Espers they're actually using. So you really can't go wrong with any of them, to be honest. Now, as we sort of touched on in the last section, Evade at this point, it's really no longer the meta comp, in the game. And that's due to the overall upward trend in accuracy that we've seen across, pretty much all of the latest units that have been released over the past, 9 months or so. But like I said, it still can be very dangerous, depending on the matchup. It really can carry the potential to completely expose, certain units that maybe don't have a sure hit or maybe don't really have that nice innate accuracy to fall back on. So considering that, it's definitely something that you can break out as a surprise play, and you can still do really well with it. Now, are these Espers here only good for evade teams? Definitely not. Glacial for one, we just saw him on the previous slide. He's a very accurate Esper as well. But, that goes for all of them here. They all have different offensive and defensive attributes, that you can leverage, pretty much just like any Esper in the game. These ones, they just happen to have one particular tree that is very solid for evade. So that's going to lead me into my next section here, and this is all about damage modifiers and kind of highlighting, the 5 main damage types in the game and some Espers that can really work well with those damage types. Now, there's definitely a lot more than what I'm showing here on the chart, but this is to more or less give you an idea and sort of help get you started. These are definitely some of the better options, to pick for their respective damage types. Of course, maybe there is a distinction for Magic Slash or Magic Missile. I'm not going to go too deeply into that aspect right now, but I'd say, in most cases, if you're dealing with that kind of unit, maybe you're better off going for an Esper that has Human Killer or maybe a specific Elemental modifier. And on that note, on top of these damage modifier nodes that I'm highlighting here, the majority of Espers in the game, they also have Elemental attack nodes as well. And generally those can net you, another 25 elemental mod. So combining those with any other damage up mods, is really where you can start maximizing your damage, if that's actually what you're trying to go for. I would say though that sort of doubling up that way is something that I tend to do more for PvE modes, where I'm really trying to reach that cap damage. You can definitely do it in PvP also. My general approach is try to be more balanced and more defensive, but on certain units, you can definitely get away with it and sort of double up on those damage nodes, especially on range units, who may not be in the direct line of fire. And this really all circles back to my team building approach that we were discussing a little bit earlier. All of these things that we're looking at are just sort of different pieces to a larger puzzle. Damage, defenses, accuracy, and evade. These attributes are different pieces that we're trying to put together towards a final build goal. And of course, that build goal is very much going to fluctuate and depend on, the current situation that you have in hand, the damage dealers that you're seeing in the meta, and of course, the actual unit that you're working with and the base attributes that they have to build on. All right, so we looked a little bit at the general purpose accuracy and evade. We looked a little bit at some offensive categories. The next few sections are all going to be about defensive attributes now, which I think is actually one of the most important aspects of these Espers, and definitely where they kind of start branching out from one another. And the first one up here that we're going to look at, we're going to be looking at raw, defense, and spirit. There are actually a number of Espers in the game that have those raw stats, that you can take on their Esper boards. And starting with defense, we actually have quite a few options here, but you can see in particular, we have several UR options. Death Machine, he's actually a limited time one. And then we have Ahriman, we have Golem, and Phoenix, all from the permanent pool. Now we do have some lower cost options here as well. Again, they're going to be great for those cost limited, sort of restricted modes and sort of shaving cost. Now most of these Espers are coming in with 15 defense available on their board, but actually some of the lower cost ones are only actually get up to 10. Moving down to Spirit, we don't have quite as many options, but all 3 of these actually come with 15 Spirit available on their Esper boards. Bloody Moon, it's really good for a magical attacker. Titan, really good for a physical attacker. And Freezus, maybe somewhere in between. Now, as I always say, in my videos, the value of defense and spirit, definitely has diminished over the last year plus of the game, but they're definitely not worthless stats, at this point, especially if you're picking up other things of interest, along the way with these particular Espers. And I would say this particular set of Espers is ones that I generally look to build up on my tanks, or maybe even on some of my bruiser units as well. The real power, though, that you can get out of these is, like I said, not only grabbing that defense and spirit, but also a specific damage resistance, or maybe even an elemental resistance along with it. So at that point, you're actually doubling up, or maybe even tripling up on the defensive effects, just with the Esper alone. And those resistances are actually what we're going to hop into and look at next. So here is the graphic, for damage resists, and these are actually all of the current highest damage resists that we can get on Espers in the game today. No single resist is going above 25%. And we do actually have 25% resist Espers for 4 out of the 5 damage types in the game, with magic actually being the only one that gets up to a 20% level. Now, resistances really are the bread and butter of Espers for me, and of course they're especially important for your frontline units who are taking the brunt of the damage, from the enemy. Now, personally, I try to build out my frontline units, with an option for, all of these damage types, but at a minimum, I would definitely recommend going for the 3 primary damage types, the ones that we see most often, and those are going to be Slash, Missile, and Magic. Now, some standouts here for me are going to be Demon Wall. Actually, he is another limited one, but he's one that I actually use all the time, and he's just so good. If you weren't actually able to grab him, though, thankfully, we do actually have several other options that can get you that 25% slash resist. A couple of other standouts for me are going to be Golem and Death Machine. Not only do they bring that top level of damage resistance, but we do actually see on the last slide that they are bringing that 15 defense there as well. So you can actually already see some of the value propositions, starting to increase here. Now, going hand in hand with those damage resistances are going to be the elemental resistances. And I would actually argue that, these are really the most beneficial defensive effect that you can get from an Esper when you're building against certain elements. Simply because these elemental resists, they're not easily penetrated like the main damage types or even the defensive spirit that we looked at. And again, I have put the Espers here, that are leading their respective categories for the various elements. And this is going to assume that you have all of the elemental resists filled in, on their boards. And remember, just like any unit, all of these Espers, they have their own innate elements. So they do actually bring bonus resistance, either positive or negative, that's going to come along with that, based on the elemental wheel. So all of that is actually factored into these values as well. So as we were sort of alluding to there on the previous slide, combining these elemental resists that you see here, along with any particular damage resist that these Espers also may hold on their board, you can really start seeing some big returns, when you're building against certain units or certain metas. For example, Demon Wall, who we were actually just talking about, he has that 25 slash resistance, as well as 20% light and 15% dark that you can see here on this slide. Of course, dark and light are probably the 2 most notorious slash elements in the game, so really it just makes him invaluable for going up against either of those types of elements. Another great example is going to be Golden Ahriman. He's actually a wind Esper, but he actually has 25% worth of ice resistance that he can pick up on his Esper board. He has the -5 innate, so that puts him at a positive 20 ice resistance, which is very strong. But remember, you can actually combine that with the 25% slash resistance that we were looking at on the previous slide. Oh, and by the way, he has that 15 defense that we were also looking at. So you can see there that you can stack all those together and really start to shut down, certain units in the game. Another couple that I want to point out here that maybe some people don't realize, that massive 25% wind resistance on Tetrasylphid. A lot of people think of that one as an evade Esper. Also very strong for building up against wind teams, which there are actually quite a few of out there. Another one I want to point out is Espers with resistance to fire. They are actually pretty hard to come by in the game, especially if you missed out on the limited time Death Machine there. Obviously, he's the best one by far. He's got that 25, which is very strong. He's another one that you can really triple up on defensive effects. Maybe if you were worried about somebody like Setia or Luartha, he does have 25 resistance to missile and 15 defense there. So very strong Esper if you were lucky enough to grab that one. But, aside from him, it's really slim pickings. I have Siren here at 10. That's really just the innate that she has from being a water Esper. But, there's a couple others out there like Leviathan. He'd be at that same 10 value as as well. Alright guys, so my last defensive one here is going to be for Ailment Resists. And I think this is actually another one that people might actually overlook when it comes to Espers. But you know, when you raise your Esper to a 3-star awakening level, they actually pick up an innate 25% ailment resist to, you know, one of the various ailments out there in the game. Now please note, you know, on the slide here, I've not included each and every ailment in the game, but you know, what I have here is ones that I'm finding of particular value, you know, in the game as it stands today and sort of the current meta that we're dealing with. Of course, the ailments which are most prevalent, you know, can shift very quickly as, you know, new units come in and out of having a high pick rate in the game. You know, for example, you know, we really weren't all that worried about the slow status effect until Summer Jaden, you know, came into the game, you know, just a couple months ago. Another one is the stop ailment. You know, we really weren't all that worried about that one either until, you know, Dark Fina and Agrius EX showed up back in the game as well. So I would say, you know, ailments in general are much more dangerous and prevalent in manual play, you know, particularly Charm is one that we're always worried about there. But, you know, even Charm, you know, at this point in autoplay with units like Sadali or Resnick or Victora, you know, we can actually see it quite a bit there as well. So, you know, I have included it here. So I think, you know, considering these things, the ailment resist that the Esper holds, you know, can potentially be part of your team building consideration as well. You know, especially if you don't have trust stones or equipment built up that you can take advantage of to help you out in those areas. Although, you know, in some cases, depending on the ability, especially if it's a limit burst, you know, a trust stone alone is not going to be enough to actually make you immune. So sometimes you actually want to double up on those resistances. Now, on the ailment front, you know, one other notable thing that I just want to point out is, you know, Frostbite is actually another pretty big one that we're seeing a lot of in the game today with, you know, Alaya especially now in the game and her enhanced chance to land that one. There's actually no current Esper in the game which holds a 25% resistance to that one, at least to my knowledge. You know, maybe I missed one somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that there isn't. But, you know, definitely something to keep in mind. You know, that is something that you may actually want to carry on a trust stone. All right, guys, so here is another one that I put together. It's just going to be just a real quick one. I know that there's probably a lot of casual folks out there, you know, maybe people who don't want to go too deeply into the team building that we've been kind of talking about and discussing here. And, you know, maybe you're just looking for a catch-all option or maybe one that's just going to be good to go to in a variety of different situations. So you can just sort of set it and forget it and sort of move on with your day. So this slide here is for you guys out there. And these are going to be my PvP mainstays. You know, a lot of these, you know, are ones that I find myself using, you know, quite often. Again, I do have Dark Ramu here on the slide. He's just going to be a phenomenal Esper, you know, really not limited to lightning, you know, whatsoever. He's probably going to be the best Esper that we've seen come into the game, you know, since Bahamut, you know, well over a year ago. So on the slide here, you know, I do have 3 categories. The first one here is I've labeled Pew Pew. This one is going to be for your damage dealers. You know, we have physical and magical designations. The second one is going to be for your tanks out there. Defense, spirit, slash resist, you know, those are probably the most universal value, you know, among the defensive effects. So those are some of the best ones that I've included there. Now my third category here, you know, maybe you want to have a low cost option available to you to kind of participate in cost restricted content. And, you know, these I would recommend for pretty much anyone. Bomb and Cactuar, you know, great low cost choices for damage dealers. Tanking is a little bit tougher, you know, when we're looking at low cost Espers, but, you know, Ogre isn't half bad. You know, he actually has some pretty good defensive nodes that he can pick up. All right, guys, so this is my very last section of the presentation today. And, you know, after what we've gone through so far, you know, we actually know a thing or two now about the various Espers in the game and sort of what they're bringing to the table, you know, at least on a surface level. So, you know, how do we actually take that information and apply it now to what we actually want to do within the game? Well, let's actually work on a practical example here and we can kind of, you know, walk through it together. So let's take Alaya, you know, one of the newer units that we have here in Global. And really the first step in the process is actually going to be understanding a little bit about the unit itself, what the strengths and weaknesses are, you know, before we can actually make an informed choice. So Alaya, you know, we know that she is an ice-based missile unit. She has high dex, you know, she likes to crit. This is also a unit that has relatively low slash resistance. She has a small weakness to magic. Her agility agility, you know, kind of middle of the pack, and her attack, you know, is down there somewhere in the middle as well. So, you know, what is actually going to be my first choice, you know, in terms of building up resonance for Alaya? Well, you know, we know from just the previous slide that Odin, you know, really is a no-brainer, you know, when it comes to any damage dealer in the game. He has that 20 agility, he's got top marks for accuracy, and then that human killer on his board, you know, it's really going to apply nicely to really any damage type in the game. So we'll keep it simple, you know, we'll start with that one. But, you know, just remember, not everybody on your team can use Odin. You know, maybe you have another unit that you really want to use that one. And, you know, and certainly depending on the situation, you know, there may actually be even better choices for Alaya here. So the first place that I start looking, you know, is within my unit's elements. In this case, it's going to be ice. So, you know, we're going to have Shiva in there. We have Fenrir, Friezus, Glacial, and then we have Manipul as well if you were lucky enough to grab him, you know, during Final Fantasy 15. Fenrir, though, you know, as we sort of looked at a little bit earlier, he's primarily going to be a slash-based Esper. He doesn't have any ice attack nodes on his board, so that's probably one that I would throw out. The other four, though, you know, they definitely could be on the short list. They all have ice element attack nodes, you know, on their board that would actually be very nice for Alaya. But besides common elements, you know, we can also think back to the damage modifier slide that I had. A couple of good options for missile damage would be Curl and Chocobo. So anything really that can help Alaya's main damage type, you know, is definitely going to be useful for her in her damage dealer role. So there's definitely another couple that we can throw on the list here. What about those defensive deficiencies, though, with the weaker slash and magic resistance that she brings innately? Well, you know, Dark Odin is one that we could look at. You know, he's flexible, you know, just like regular Odin with his man killer nodes that he has, and he actually has nice magic resistance nodes available to him, so he definitely could be a pretty solid choice. Manipul, you know, another ice Esper, you know, has nice slash resist that it brings, you know, as well as that ice attack to help out our offense. Of course, really, that's just sort of scratching the surface there, you know, in terms of defensive Espers, but we can definitely shore up some of our weaknesses, you know, with these couple here. Now, another approach might be to actually double down on some of the defensive strengths that the unit brings innately. Alaya here, we can see, has very, very nice pierce resistance, for example, at that 15 value. So, you know, maybe you actually want to build upon that for going up against, you know, Flag Bearer Glaciella, for example. Well, remember that in addition to that ice attack, Shiva actually brings 20% pierce resistance, you know, on her board. That is one of the highest in the game for any Esper. And being an ice elemental Esper, she also has 10 wind resistance that she brings innately as well. On top of that, top marks for agility as well, coming in at that 20 value. Of course, you know, these selections can be very meta dependent. You know, maybe you actually wanted to go with something that was more with missile resistance. So, you know, obviously you would have to look and sort of decide what is going to be the best for the matchup that you have at hand. But, you know, these are sort of the questions and the process that you should go through to sort of come up with, you know, the optimal Espers, you know, for the unit that you're working on. Of course, you know, Odin and Bahamut, you know, they're going to be the easy ones to sort of start with, but, you know, to sort of branch out from there and really optimize and min-max, you know, you're really going to want to start looking at the, you know, the defensive and offensive attributes of the various Espers. So remember, you know, just as we did here, first look within your elemental choices, then start to look at the damage and defensive related attributes that the different Espers can bring. And then you can start to see if there's any overlap there, you know, between the choices, and, you know, those are the ones that actually should shoot up your priority list and probably the ones that you should start building first. All right, so there it is, guys. You know, like I said at the beginning, you know, Espers are a core part of team building in this game, and that is definitely why I focused on it so much here today. It really is such a broad topic and one that I actually found very challenging to sort of distill down to its essence. So I hope that I was able to accomplish that here in a clear way and sort of help you guys along on your journey. I will go ahead and put a download link to the infographics that we went over here today. You can find that in the description, so feel free to grab them and use them if you find them useful. I know that visual aids can sometimes be pretty helpful. You know, I personally am a visual learner myself. I will say though that WoTVCalc.com, you know, it is really an essential tool for this as well. All of the Espers are there, you know, with their full build trees that you can look at. You can actually do some mock building there as well. So I would definitely encourage everyone out there to definitely check that out and utilize that if you haven't already. Tell me what you thought about the video today in the comments down below. Did you find it helpful? Was there anything that you missed in today's discussion, or maybe things that you'd like to see me discuss in the future? I'm really trying to check off my list, a lot of these foundational topics in the game, just to sort of help guide along a lot of the newer players that we have out there. So definitely let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the video today, or you did find it helpful, definitely hit that like button for me. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.